Hey, what up, guys? Welcome back to Think Shank, where we tackle questions about sports that aren't raised nor explored enough as far as we can tell. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkShank. You can email us at thethinkshank@gmail.com. And we are now live on TikTok, long overdue. You can die a hero or live long enough to try to go viral. And here we are. It is at think.shank. I don't know who on earth stole ThinkShank without the dot, but just a period. I swear it's me. All the art's the same. Hi, me. I am Skyler Reinhardt, your personal NBA junkie, philosopher, tour guide, or whatever else you'd like. Today, we're back at it, doing it for clout. You can find me on Twitter at Reinhardt Skyler. That's ReinHardtSkyler. Please no A's. And Instagram at Skyler Sam, S-A-M, Reinhardt. So it is Monday, March 25th. It is a little bit late at night, but alas, gotta do it because today we're gonna talk about sports betting in the NBA. The NBA has really embraced sports betting with open arms, and most major American sports have as well. There are clearly pros and cons of this, and in light of the recent news, which I will break down for you guys, I truly think this is going to become an extremely large looming question for commissioners to navigate. That is really it for today. I really want to sink my teeth in with my sort of research, amateur, investigative journalism instincts. Thankfully, I'm not even sponsored yet. If you listen to any sports podcast, you would know that every other ad is FanDuel or DraftKings or Prize Picks. And hey, I got nothing holding me back, baby. Let's jump onto them. I'm ready. So, without further ado, let's think Shank. All right. Well, what I want to start off with is let's break down the recent story that broke earlier today involving Jontay Porter, Michael Porter Jr.'s brother, and the gambling investigation he is currently under, as well as some of the other stories that have broken throughout the year. Half stories, half not, that fall under this umbrella that I think are relevant to bring up. And then after that, I'd like to postulate and discuss some of the potential implications that I have identified off the bat. I think some of them, as you'll see, are much more likely than others. However, even the ones that are pretty likely are pretty important and critical to get right. After that, I want to discuss some of the analysis of the situation, given some of those potential implications, of course, and then finally throw out some potential solution ideas. I have no agenda, I have no income from this, and maybe that's my superpower for now. Hopefully just for now. Please pay me. Number one is Jontay Porter. So quick context on this. So back on December 8th, he signed a two-way contract with the Toronto Raptors. He is making $550K, about $560K per year. And so that is for all players signing two-way contracts. What that means is you get to play with us this year, and then we get to reconvene and collectively decide on our future partnership together. That's why it's two ways. And the salary for those players signing those type of contracts change each year. This year it is about $560K. But the interesting thing for Jontay, as well as a bunch of the other two-way contract guys, is they are paid in a prorated fashion depending on when they actually sign the contract. Makes sense, paid for the service that you provide. And so he signed on December 8th. So that is going to shave off October and November. And then since that date, he has been averaging under 14 minutes a game, putting up 4 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists in 26 games total. And here is where the story begins. On January 26th and March 20th, so about a 2-month gap, his prop bets for his individual player bets, points, three-pointers, what have you, his individual player bets you could bet on were the top money-making bets each night. For example, the first night, the prop of him hitting under 0.5 3-point makes hit at minus 120, meaning it was so likely that he was not going to hit a single three that it became the biggest money-making bet of the entire night of NBA basketball. I'm saying that way to give you a flavor and give you the outline of the type of player we're talking about. Not a ton of impact, not a ton of shot making, not a ton of minutes, not a ton of anything, okay? But how do we know that? I thought that was interesting. We know that because DraftKings Sportsbook Insight, it's like a daily report of the top money-making bets in the NBA that's shared with the media only. And so, number one, I didn't know that existed. Two, why would they just send it just to the media? Are they allowed to sport? Probably not. I don't think they're allowed to bet on these things, but I don't know. I didn't have time to really dive into the specifics of that, but now you know, the media people all know what kind of bets have been hitting the most. A little befuddled about that. That is a context. So we had two nights, his own individual player props, bets on his own player performance were the two biggest money-making bets you could make on those two specific nights in the NBA. He actually exited those two games early, one with a, I believe, head or eye injury in that first game. Clearly made that under bet hit because he only played, I believe it was 3 minutes or something. And then the second night, he left early as well for an apparent unexpected illness. That was the official report. And wouldn't you know it, all of his bets were under as well. The only real comment we got from the Raptors was Darko saying, hey, any officially listed injury, nothing was amiss. There was no reason to be scrutinizing that. Like, nothing weird was really going on. Nobody has obviously been able to get in touch with him himself, and the league themselves have not really commented on any details surrounding the investigation. And then the Raptors, as a franchise overall, have just said simply they are looking into it. And then last week he played with the Toronto Raptors on Wednesday. They had a back-to-back, so had another game on Thursday. He was not even with the team on Thursday, and he has been separated since. So the news broke today, Monday, right? A few days later. That is all we know as of now. Other urgency drivers, too, that stuck out to me was JB Bickerstaff. If you don't know, he's a head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He said on the record last week, saying that him and his family have been threatened by sports gamblers who apparently got access to his phone number and had been sending him literal threats over text about guys playing minutes and making them money. Awesome. And then even before that, this is going back closer to the new year when Tyrese Halliburton was interviewed, notoriously was very adamantly against the 65-game player participation threshold because of his own injury and the fact he has $43 million on the line if he makes an all-NBA team, which the general consensus is that he will, but he has to play 65 games. And so basically he had to come back early from the injury in order to qualify and really hasn't been playing well. And was asked during a practice, I believe it was a practice, about his own sentiment and outlook on that situation. And he said explicitly, yeah, I know it's easy to think of me as just a player prop to make you money. And it sucks that no one really cares about how I feel. Continued on with his own train of thought there about rehabbing and things like that. But that was noticed and circulated quite a bit. And so I like these examples because they outline a bunch of the different perspectives that we're dealing with. We have number one, Jonte Porter, and we will very soon find out what the league's perspective is on these kind of potential infractions, etc. Two, you have an NBA coach saying and explaining what some of the physical threats are in the chamber, if you will, related to gamblers and how they react to guys not putting their players in betting odds in the best positions. And then three, you have the players themselves and how they feel about it. Interesting sort of trifecta here. Of course, that first one, and by far the most directly relevant and interesting of the three. We will figure that out. So that is just the recent stories that have been circulating in the news. Next, I want to mention quickly a couple other league-specific developments. Number one, there are just way too many sports betting ads. We all know that there is a lot of money on the table for the league, for the media, for the third-party betting vendors and companies themselves. Probably mental health support clinics. I don't know. There's just a lot of money going around. There's just nonstop ads for sports betting now. The league has just embraced it, like a small orphan child takes it in, tucks it in, and now they just won't stop talking about it. Basically, you'll literally be watching a game and it will tell you throughout the game multiple times, here is the starting spread before the game started, and then here's what it's at now, especially when you have lead changes that widely sway one way or the other. One team was down by a ton and now they came back. You'll also see a ton of ads on virtually every single sports media podcast or TV show now, or normal shows as well, that are for FanDuel, DraftKings, PrizePicks, whatever, and they are all literally the exact same platform, all trying to get in on the pie. That is just one in terms of the overall landscape and how you just see all of the players inside of the traditional sports ecosystem being enwrapped in a cocoon of sports betting money. It is unbelievable how much and how, frankly, just quickly, it's almost like a switch just got flipped. You've got nonstop ads in the product itself, all of the accompanying content media shows and podcasts and whatnot. And then last but not least, the news was just broke late last week, ironically enough, that the NBA app itself, the League Pass app, where you can access a bunch of the stats, you can vote for All-Star, the NBA's just official app, it's gonna have live betting features very soon. Here you now have embracing sports gambling to an unprecedented level, to the point where you can't even watch a game without it being displayed and integrated into the product itself and being advertised and marketed to God knows how old people are on the NBA app. I feel like the average age of an NBA fan is about 14 years old now. But then you also have the entire ecosystem of sports is, again, being enwrapped in basically a cocoon, like the black Spider-Man suit, where you got like the Venom serum and it just like jumps on Eddie Brock and he becomes Venom. Like that is kind of what has happened. There are so many metaphors and jokes about AI that I could be giving. I don't want to go down a pit of despair. Always, 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 the market changes way faster and then you have to move backwards. There's almost never a wait, figure everything out, put in the appropriate amount of funding and investments and whatever to determine how to best do stuff. It is always go and then walk it back. The biggest similarity to me this entire time I've been researching this topic has been vaping, right? Huge problem, ultimately. But if you remember the onset of it, okay, it's not just that it basically strangleheld an entire market in a matter of months out of nowhere. Every college kid on earth in the US had a Juul, probably. If they said they didn't, cool, good for them. But what happened? Well, it took over the entire market. Everybody had one. And the capitalist principle, the most fundamental molecular capitalist principle of I have a good idea of a product and a service, and there is a ton of people who would be willing to give me money to do that thing, that fundamental idea or concept that makes capitalism work was suddenly not okay, right? You're gonna get kids addicted to nicotine, which in turn is gonna make them wanna do tobacco, and we don't even know the long-term effects of vaping and yada, yada, yada. So like public health policymakers and whatever else eventually walked it back, right? Depends on where you live now, of course. There's a part of my brain that just can't unsee that overall kind of trend. I don't know. This isn't a politics podcast, but like, listen to me. It's just like vaping. You're going to get kids addicted to nicotine. You're going to get kids addicted to gambling, and it's going to be bad. And then we're going to try it. And so here we are. And now Juul is running rampant in like South Asia, but they're not making money here anymore. But it goes back to the fundamental idea almost of like the ESG stuff. So I have a background in some of this space or whatever. It's like, are companies obligated to give a about your own health and how you make decisions? Absolutely not. Should they? And will customer bases potentially ultimately care enough that it will impact your bottom line and therefore you will start to care? Maybe. So now what I want to do is I want to move into the potential implications. Number one is I just think the timing is funny because we just got the news about the referee. I did a video last week about the referees calling fewer fouls. They're evolving their interpretation of the rules and not calling certain things that used to be called, et cetera, et cetera. The devil's advocate conspiracy guy in the back of my brain is like, that's funny timing. The spotlight's not on the refs anymore. Now we have a cool interplay between everybody caring a lot about their money and their props, but we're not calling as many fouls. So then therefore, does that mean that we wanted to have the refs play a smaller role in determining the outcomes / production of certain I don't know. I'm just saying it's a little funny. It's a little funny to me. You know, you're cutting out not the middleman, but you're cutting out another party or entity involved in the operational apparatus of the product, right? So it's a little more predictable, right? It's a little more predictable. We're going to have less involvement of the refs. Just play. Interesting. I'm just saying that's point number one, and maybe that will get highlighted, maybe it won't. 2, the league dehumanization. Halliburton basically got to this. I can't personally imagine the sacrifice, dedication, discipline, everything that goes into becoming a professional athlete to then have the fans who you had probably pictured every time you took a free throw, like, I don't know, like rooting you on and wanting to represent, you know, not only your team, but your own family and journey and now all of a sudden they're like, are you serious? How did you not get that rebound? What? I just think that that's really, really depressing. And if that is ultimately what things come down to, and I understand, like, this is what we're democratizing, the value and the money that can be obtained from a sport, right? People are now able to profit off of you, right? Like that's kind of what we're doing. And it's just sad. You know, it's just sad. You're dehumanizing them. They've been through God knows how much. God forbid, they have a bad game or something like, you know, Halliburton was getting at. And it's just like, dude, that bridges pretty seamlessly into a just shadow third bullet that, again, guys, if I think of something that I think matters, I'm going to say it. Number 3 is going to be fan violence. So Bickerstaff already touched on that. You want to go to a stadium with a pissed off dude with maybe not the most stable mental health history. And they say addiction is a crazy thing. And that is a thing. And we have a lot of issues as is. I'm not even going to finish a take. So that doesn't make me super stoked. Number 4 is the shift in the spirit / mission of the game. Let me put it to you this way. Magnifying sports betting to a very large extent opens the door for fans to actually want their own team to lose or like not play well. Like, I know that that's very obvious when you kind of like spell it out, but like just think about that. That can happen. That happens all the time. That might be the easiest way to highlight a point of philosophical contention here. Like, I just don't think that's smart. I don't think that's good. That's not good for your product. Misaligning certain incentives and I don't know, that's weird. Like I'm saying, the shift in the mission of the spirit of the game is to always win. You want your team to do well. And then what happens? If that happens, you are opening the door then also to players to give even less of a about the fans they're playing for. Like, dude, leave me alone. Stop it. I don't care. I'm not just a parlay machine. This is stupid. Don't talk to me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're opening the door for some of these rifts to take place here. 5, you have game alteration, which is kind of the next evolution in my brain, which is now we have Jonte Porter. So we have a non-star player who is incentivized to earn more income by betting on his own games. That is not amazing, and there are a bunch of levers, of course, that you can pull. Any player or employee of the NBA would, I'm sure, love to hear, let's pay everybody more, just like the All-Star game when I think Windhorst was saying we need to pay the players more. No, you don't. No, you do not. We all have seen how competitive these guys can be. There is no reason Anthony Edwards needs to be taking shots left-handed. They were talking about $500,000 for the in-season tournament. Man, is that even going to be enough? I mean, who cares? The star plays. Look at what happened. They're going to care. Thank you, in large part, to LeBron James for setting that precedent. Listen, man, you can't be altering your own game that impacts an entire fan base who care, a team who is also putting in work that you are now undermining. I mean, what are we talking about? I don't want to hear anything about the income, man. I'm sorry. I really don't. I don't think a lot of these young players, they're too entitled to care, which is really unfortunate. A lot of these guys come in with absurd contracts at what, 19, 20? And then what? The answer is just always money now. So the income thing, part of the game alteration stuff. We'll see what happens with Porter there. 2 is the mid-game player exposure due to live betting. This is a really good take I had seen online where you have guys at halftime, you know, media members see it. Guys are literally on their phone at halftime. And I'm not saying every guy's looking at their own player props, but they could. And they could also be having conversations with their younger brothers or cousins about certain props that maybe they wanted to get in on, and maybe they're not even trying to make themselves money. Crazy idea, right? Yeah. Another example was fans yelling at players on the bench, which media members have already confirmed as well, where you have, especially to start the fourth quarter, where most of the time star players will, you know, sit the first few minutes of the fourth quarter, play the rest of it, come in at that first TV break, like 9 minutes. You'll get some fans. Hey, 2 more boards. That's it. Just get 2 more. And granted, professional athletes, one of their superpowers compared to the lay people like us, so they're really, really good at blocking shit out like that. That's still not good. Even without the people yelling, without checking the phones, I just think it's an unnecessary source of added pressure, or just another unnecessary variable, period. I mean, I can hear people saying, well, dude, it's been, you know, kind of a black market thing forever. Like, why is it that much different? Well, it is objectively different now, because now your boss, your grand, super, mega, ultra boss, your employer, is riding this wave hard. And if you're a star player, you got expectations to deliver in big games, all of a sudden, you didn't just let yourself down, you didn't let your childhood coaches down, you didn't let your family down. Now you let a lot of bloodthirsty gamblers down. Why? I'm not saying it's going to upend the natural order of how everything works. It's just unnecessary, I think. And then the last part is the end of games just might be weird. We saw earlier, like a few weeks ago, that Shea had one of the most egregious, stat padding displays that I've actually seen. I think it might have even been a home game at Oklahoma City, literally cutting the deficit down to like 6 or 8 points after making a fast break layup when literally nobody else on the court is moving. And you just took the inbound and ran like you're running a 100-meter. Like, that was embarrassing. When you're down by so many points, at a certain point, you kind of just need to hit threes or try to get fouled and finish. And the other team knows that, and they're guarding you as such, and that therefore they and everybody else can tell that you're kind of stat padding. Like, it's just not good. So then you sprinkle in some props, and all of a sudden it's, my little brother can make some money. Thank God. I don't know. Again, these are potential implications. I'm not saying they're all going to happen. These are just my initial thoughts. There you go. The next section is analysis. And so while we're waiting for the outcome of the Jonte Porter investigation, we at least have some perspectives from the coach-player side. I think we have made some pretty realistic assumptions and projections as far as potential implications go, whether that's short or long-term, unclear. My guess would be short, given the fact that the NBA and Adam Silver are moving very, very quickly to have sports betting be an irreparable, irreplaceable component of the entire apparatus of the league. Here are my biggest kind of takeaways, thoughts, things, considerations to consider here. Number one, just very plainly, I think this could become the biggest challenge ever for Adam Silver. His entire regime, I'm not kidding. We had a somewhat similar issue with the optics of the league going back to the James Harden stuff, with the Trae Young stuff and the Steph Curry stuff. He has overseen drastic strides of change in the evolution of the sport. From a rulemaking and policy side, we have seen players make unbelievably more amounts of money in their contracts. We have seen the league peak in the mid to 2010s with the Cavs and Warriors. And in a lot of ways, we have seen, right, the offensive explosion we talked about. There has been no shortage, right? And even the expansion teams up and coming on the horizon, right? Trying to get guys, right? They played in France earlier this year, trying to make it more international. A bunch of the organizational enterprise level strategic ventures and challenges, priorities to sort of manage and juggle, right? I still think this could very well have the most significant and longest reaching impact on the league as a product than anything else Adam Silver has had to grapple with. Plainly, we're talking about enormous upsides and downsides. If you do this right, figure out how to get guys to not bet on their own games, how to monitor, regulate, audit. Let's be real. A lot of junkies like to make money. A lot of junkies like sports. It's making sense. Don't do it right. I highly recommend you go into Google, ask Uncle G what happened in the NBA refereeing debacle around the turn of the century, where a ref was caught basically doing what Jonte Porter is accused of doing. Is he was betting on games that he was literally officiating. Interesting stuff. Just look up the stuff about the number of phone calls he made in the months leading up to that other referee before he got sacked. And Scott Foster is very much in the league, and that has never been fully disclosed and unpacked for the public. My point is, that debacle happened. We're talking about significantly more money on the line this time. We are also talking about the league trying to prove it can be self-accountable by limiting free throws and creating equity in offensive and defensive foul calls, all of these things. There are just a lot of juggling happening, and I think that this is not even close to the level of potential downstream impact. We are talking about bottom line impacts beyond anything we have ever seen related to the league. We are also talking about a public policy dilemma as far as the average age of an NBA fan and suffocating them with sports betting propaganda and advertisement. Imagine if every time you went to the doctor's office, they were so hungry for profits that they literally had ads for Juuls just on the wall. Like, that's basically what we're doing here, right? Like, are you that money hungry that you are just head first into, I don't care, let's get it going. In the app, in the game, in the product, in the pregame, the midgame, postgame, all of it. Like with vaping, right? You could be like, I'm going to veto, whatever. We're going to make sure it's not sold at our drugstores and our neighborhood market. We're not even going to have them in there. We're going to have better policing in the bathrooms of our middle and high schools. Okay, great. You can't even watch the game without exposure to it, right? Like, I'm sorry. I know I'm not painting this in a good light, but like, that is a public health dilemma, potential one, right? So we've got a lot of money on the line. We've got public health. And then we have the potential risk of the degradation of the entire product itself. If guys can bet on their own games, if guys' family and friends can bet on their games, what does that say about the commissioners and overall league office's ability to regulate itself, to hold itself accountable? What does that say about the individual franchises and teams themselves, going from the GM all the way to the head coach, just like Darko? And what does that say for Adam Silver? He lovingly has a great nickname of Adam Sharman and says he's a players commissioner. The number of sack taps by Draymond Green in the past 5 years alone lead me to believe that is a very, very true moniker for him. Honestly, Ja Morant was the biggest thing that he really stepped in to do, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I know this isn't a video about that, but that was misguided and introduced from the wrong place. It was clearly introduced reactively and then through the lens of the worst case scenario, like contingency planning. Nobody got hurt, borderline infringing on individual liberties, but at the minimum overreacting to what I would estimate to be the worst 5 to 10% stakeholder group of, oh my God, this is insane, we're doing, whatever. And then again, I'm sorry, you have Draymond Green actually choking somebody out from behind on live television. That's assault. That's like a misdemeanor at minimum. That's literally a crime. That is a criminal thing, and you wouldn't even make a decision on it. You were like, Warriors, this is your problem. You figure that out. Indefinite suspension, but it's up to you. You figure that out. I just need to make money, and I can't be the scapegoat here. That is what I'm getting at. So we have enormous implications for the bottom line, good or bad. Public health risk as far as youth. I'm looking at you, vaping industry. It's not that dissimilar. It really isn't. The reputation and legacy for Adam Silver as a commissioner. You're really hard on Ja Morant for flashing a firearm on Instagram, and Draymond Green can choke somebody out for 20 full seconds on live TV, and you won't even make a verdict on how long that should warrant a suspension for. Maybe not soft, but at minimum, a bit inconsistent and lacking backbone in realistic terms. Insider gambling fiasco at the turn of the century. How much did we learn? We're going to find out how much of a stick you really carry. Who has more to lose from this going south, like not being handled well? I would say number one is the sports betting vendors themselves. We all know what happened to Jewel. We all know what happened to Hyde. They are formally no longer players in the market. You have the NBA itself, which again, back to the legacy thing for Adam Silver, the players commissioner, the ESG king, needing to protect our communities, nice guy. Oh my God, now I'm watching the degradation of the entire league in real time because I don't know how to navigate this. And it is challenging, but you don't need to be, diving into the deep end of the pool as soon as you can and make as much money as possible. And then 3, I had Vegas. I know, obviously, they've always had the power behind setting lines and doing all of these analyses. They probably have AI and supercomputer that is from the future, and they are the only ones who have it. They probably have better computers than the military, honestly. I just can't get past that as another player in the overall ecosystem as far as, I don't know, I'm spitballing off the dome here. It just feels like such a shadow operation in my opinion. It's not how they go about setting lines and whatever. It's the role that they will have in the new world where sports betting is legal everywhere, Again, I'm not saying they do anything wrong. I just don't know if they've had this much prominence, again, in how public consciousness approaches and intakes and digests and consumes the sports that drive the American sports industry, I'm just saying they have a really big role in this, and I don't think they've always had that role. And again, we are just going right into it. And as I get into later on, I am a very big proponent of third parties being introduced to introduce some kind of checks and balances and oversight and governance of operational decisions and how they're impacting different demographics and yada yada. Like, but Vegas is also trying to make money. Like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I guess I didn't think this entirely through, and clearly this is just me talking into a microphone, but like, you know, there's just something there where the Vegas supercomputer people that live in the fucking desert and get beamed on by the sun all day are just coming up with numbers that could end up with a team bus getting ran off a bridge. Like, I don't know. I'm just saying. I know that's crazy. I know that's really dark, but I'm just saying, I don't know who does that. I don't know if they've had any, more power than they will now. So anyway, there's a thing. I think that there are two other underlying factors in my analysis section. The last two things I just want to touch on. Number one, with Jonte Porter, the investigation into him betting on the under for his own player props, getting subbed out of the game, had an injury, had an illness. Oh my God, I can't play. Oh my God, the under hit. Who would have guessed? Teams have been tanking forever. Look at Dallas. Look at Dallas last year, right? Look at the process Sixers. I think that this whole question is going to bubble up some of the scheming that goes on, not just at the player level, the player betting level, but at the team level of, are we trying to tank? Jakob Poeltl undergoes finger surgery, opted for it. Did he need to do that? I don't know. Could the Raptors be in the play-in? I'm not just saying this as a fan. Absolutely. There are just some very weird things going on there. We all know that picks aren't even real anymore. If you aren't in the weeds of the league, like, basically nobody has their own picks anymore. Everybody is dealing out their future, like, left and right, because you're either in win now or you're rebuilding, which is its own thing, its own separate podcast and psychological conundrum, honestly. But my point is that these kinds of team tanking perceptions, if you will, again, I think the league announced it was formally investigating Dallas's decision to sit Luka Doncic for, I believe, literally their last game against a trash team. I don't even remember who it was, but there was physically zero reason for last year's Mavericks to lose that game. And they pulled Luka in the most sus way possible. And there is absolutely 0.000 repeating percent chance that that was not an executive management decision to sit him, to come up with it, whatever reason it was, or to embellish it, magnify it, amplify it, whatever you want to say, in order to lose that game, not make the playoffs, get a higher draft pick, get the guy they wanted. Now, some people will say, that's part of it, man. What are you going to do? How are you supposed to, innovate anything else and fix any of that, whatever. I understand. Back to one of my original points at the top. When you have a shift in the spirit or the mission of the game, AKA, again, as soon as you stop trying to win games, it is extremely simple, guys. Every team, every employee of the league has one job: win the game. I don't care about your draft picks. I don't care about anything else. That is it. And now we hear about Jonte Porter potentially profiting off of his own player props, panning out in a way that hurts his own team. He was profiting off of going under what his projections were. So not good, but I'm trying to highlight this can go up to the team level. Secondly, entitlement. Has me reminded of the All-Star game when you had Anthony Edwards shooting left-handed. It was absolutely humiliating, the level of impact and interest that, buy-in that the players really had to make that an exciting and engaging game this past year. And so this entire thing just has me with flashbacks from that experience where guys were whining to get paid. And honestly, some of the media members were supporting that. Same thing with the in-season tournament. I'm sorry, in my own unprofessional opinion, I think people are just uneducated in business psychology, organizational psychology, and particularly in the context of incentivizing or penalizing certain behaviors. I have a degree in policy analysis and management. I hate flashing that around, but a huge part of that was, how do you get people to do what you want them to do? And there are a bunch of different levers you can pull, and almost none of them include strictly pay them more, and then they will eventually do what you want them to do. That is not a linear graph. It is not linear. Like it works really well, incentivize, and then eventually you're gonna get some kind of taper because, eventually it's just not worth the effort, it's not worth the money, right? Whatever, nobody has limitless money. What happens once you get over that hump where you're still paying them more on the X, but then they're not really giving you the returns they want? That's called entitlement. That's called, why try harder? I'm already making so much money, it's not worth my time. I don't think we need to be paying guys at the bottom more in order to disincentivize them to sports bet. None of these are proven, obviously. I'm actually not so sure how much of the time guys will be trying to make themselves directly profit off of whatever they're doing. Things like friends, family, that sort of thing, I actually think will very much be a big part of it, potentially the majority of it. My second point is, guys, it's a bad precedent. I hate the metaphor, but it's kind of like bratty kids. I almost wish coming out of the All-Star game that there were legitimate penalties dished out to Ant and Luka and Jokic and a bunch of the guys who didn't care. There were some really interesting notes from just some other podcasts that I'd heard about potential restructures to help improve the competitiveness, aka removing the guy, or basically benching the guys who don't care because of changing out who's coaching the game, for example, or whatever. Like, you had first-time All-Star like Tyrese Halliburton actually kind of caring, and it was entertaining in a good way, but then of course he's got to make room for some other guy who doesn't care and has made the All-Star team like 6 times and just literally doesn't care. So anyway, my point is, you can't feed entitlement. It is a myopic business practice. It is a myopic policy practice. And guys are making an already exuberantly high amount of income already. And we all know they're competitors. We all know they're competitive. You are consciously choosing to not care and to not be good ambassadors of your own sport and league and fan bases. We voted you in. I don't know how many people know this. 50% of All-Star votes come from the fans. It's not all NBA. You don't get to vote on that. But it's almost like a bad return on investment here. It's like, I literally pay tax dollars for your stadium. You get to play here and you get to make a ton of money and live out your dreams. And I love that. You just need to try for one weekend. One extra weekend, sorry. And it's not the whole team. It's just I don't know. That's its own thing. It blows my mind that is even an issue. It's really, really sad. But those are the two main underlying factors. One is team level scheming, basically. And then 2 is entitlement. Don't feed entitlement. Okay, now we're gonna move into solutions, my last section. What is the right question given everything else we've covered? Is it, how do you prevent players from directly or indirectly profiting from sports betting? Is it, how do you prevent players from seeing or hearing live props in the game and thus altering the outcome of the game? Is it, how do you disincentivize players from caring or participating by paying them more or something like that? These are just some questions I came up with that build the outline around the challenge we're talking about here. I'm going to give my recommendations throughout, but I thought the most logical way to traverse across, I organized it into a framework based on the stakeholder or operating body, entity, whatever you want to call it, inside of this overall ecosystem. Number 1 is a league. A league office, Adam Silver, already laid out the pressure's on. You got high upside, high downside. You got shareholders wanting a bigger check. You got policymakers, public policy lobbyists defending, childhood rights to not be brought in on nicotine and sports gambling. You got a bunch of people yelling in Adam Silver's ear. So what kind of levers do they have to pull? Number one, I have policies. So no phones at halftime. I don't know how realistic that is. I think that that's been a policy for a really long time now at this point. I don't know if you can take back those kinds of liberties. And I also weirdly think that that could impact basically the econometric study of doing that on how much did it, reduce sort of players trying to stat pad or something else like that. I think if you took away guys' phones at halftimes, it would by itself impact how guys play. So I think you're actually just forced to discuss things. Game plan, I don't know. But that's just, idea number one, whatever. Number two, by far the biggest and I think most sensical way to navigate this overall challenge, and I tweeted about it earlier, is manufacturing a martyr. And this is unfortunate. It truly is. I think that for a lot of the reasons I laid out before, the track record of the league, in my opinion, not demonstrating its ability to effectively hold itself accountable and evolve how it interprets and enforces its own rules, how it disciplines players in the past, things like that. I don't see them grappling and managing effectively this overall challenge in a way that will be preemptive and proactive enough while also being effective enough that I unfortunately do see there being a pretty reasonably probable scenario where somebody's going to get made a martyr. It might be Jonte Porter. It might be Jonte Porter and the Toronto Raptors. It might be Jonte Porter and his older brother and their family. It might be another random interpreter. I think they're American, but maybe we'll find somebody else to take the fall. You know what I mean? I've experienced in the public and private spaces when it comes to improving outcomes for employees, for businesses, for populations in the public space, for certain demographic groups and cohorts and things like that. It is virtually unprecedented for an organization to look over the cliff and see opportunity in a business sense that clearly and that within reach and not jump for it before investing adequately in projecting out certain downstream impacts and implications. And what you will commonly and almost ubiquitously see is they will try something, the unexpected downstream effects become very, very prevalent, and then you have to walk it back. Depending on how it goes, right, can vary in outcome. For Jewel, RIP, but you understand what I mean. And, for the pharmacists prescribing opium, or painkillers, whatever, back in the 70s or whenever that was, they just paid out billions of dollars to people that literally shake and have seizures in bed if they don't take the. It's not good. And I'm not breaking news when I say money is pretty regularly the biggest disease of all when it comes to decision making and what have you. But this all leads back to my original point of I unfortunately don't have the confidence or trust in Adam Silver, the overall league, the governance measures in place. To my knowledge, to be fair, in researching this, I was able to uncover a few surprising things that I'll get to eventually. But the third parties that they have in place for surveillance and auditing, just based on what I've seen, I don't have enough faith in them preemptively doing this right. I don't see them getting it right the first time, and I don't know how well I see them evolving it effectively along the way without it being a situation where we have a Jonte Porter Band-Aid slapped on it and then another Band-Aid, and then another one. Like, when you try to be the people's commissioner and people's regime so much and be considerate to all parties and everything like that, you can't make everybody happy always. But you can make as many people happy as reasonably as you can with proper foresight and investment of time, energy, consideration, etc. So would not be surprised if somebody takes a fall very hard, and that becomes the example going forward of, if you with this, you're gonna pay for it. And I think that that is more than likely not only the most effective route, but I think it's also the easiest and cheapest. Honestly. Okay, so number one, that's a league. Number two is the non-office operating bodies of the league. So that is like the teams themselves, the players association, things like that. Again, they're inside of the ecosystem, but they're not the league office. They're not the players themselves. They're not the media. I can very well see a world where Adam Silver takes the same route he did with Draymond when he decentralized accountability and empowered the Warriors to decide on how long is enough for him to come back. The Warriors, I don't have money to back this up, but I have to imagine the Warriors might bring in the most revenue of any franchise in the league. They've got to be top 5. They are not very good without Draymond Green spearheading their defense as well as their playmaking on offense. If Draymond Green is out for as many games as Ja Morant, it's probably going to be really bad for the bottom line, for the fans in the Bay and what have you. And so basically it wasn't our decision, me being Adam Silver. It wasn't my decision. It was theirs, okay? Can very, very easily see that being the move here that Adam Silver takes. I wasn't in the Raptors room. I can only sponsor these kind of HRE classes that guys have to take and all those things. So I'm letting them decide and shoulder the brunt of ensuring guys are following no-brainer policies about profiting off of their own performances on their own teams or their own games. So that wasn't validated, but that was at least planted in the original article that I read from The Athletic, that basically just had a very, very quick initial quote from Darko, the Raptors head coach. When he was asked very quickly about the Porter investigation, at least the way the article was written, the first thing he said was there was nothing amiss about the injury report, right? There was nothing weird about that. And so I just say that to say, obviously he's going to say that. Obviously he's going to cover his own ass. Obviously it's not his fault. Obviously it's not Porter's fault, right? It's the same thing. We got to cover each other's back, et cetera, et cetera. So I only say that to say that's where I got this idea, where Darko's going to look bad if Ponte was being stupid and betting on his own games. Therefore, the teams have stuff to lose as well, not just the player's own reputation and money and blah, blah, blah. So why not just have it all rest on them? Number two, the Players Association. According to Garrett Temple, the Players Association VP also happens to be on the Toronto Raptors roster as well as the vice president of the Players Union, who is literally accountable for these kinds of classroom sessions and whatever things. He called out, they've had player education meetings on sports betting and gambling at least once a year for years now, so far before it was legalized. It should obviously have been way before it was legalized anyway, buddy, because you can do it in the black market as is. But, I just say that to say, you got two of the other, non-office operating bodies in the league outspokenly taking the approach of innocent until proven guilty. We did our job. We're going to look bad if we don't say that. We're going to look bad if we don't do that. Also, shout out Garrett Temple. Dude's literally on your roster, and he's betting on his own games. I hope for your sake that he's innocent, frankly. And that's my point, is if I was Adam Silver and I'm looking around, man, you guys got a lot to lose if you mess that up. No. Well, hey, look, I do the bare minimum. We got a lot of players, 450 of them. So 3, betting vendors, FanDuel, DraftKings, Prize Picks, whatever you want to call it. Number 1, security protocol. I don't know the ins and outs of this whole industry and space. I am sure in order to become legal or legalized in the states that they are. They had to prove a bunch of stuff, and I'm sure they have a bunch of protocol in there. One of the ones that was noted inside of the article was that they have betting operators flag suspicious activity inside of, their own companies to flag that. So obviously, if you're talking about an illegal marketplace, you're not going to have that. So I guess I can see that. How in the red can you actually go? Can you track IP addresses? Is that an infringement of civil? Like, I have no idea, dude. I just think about sports betting in pretty close to the worst case scenario, as I think as policymakers, you have to start from. If you got a dude putting his son's college fund on the line for a Siakam free throw, like, it's not going to be good. And Siakam's a great free throw shooter, but that's just not, so my point is, you think about the worst case scenarios, something doesn't go great, you get into a stadium, something bad happens, whatever. You're going to have questions about that. You're going to have questions about security protocol. Same thing with the gun access, right? What was going on with them? Who noticed what? Did somebody report something? Who sold him the gun? What was his test result? Blah, 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 blah. It's the same exact thing here. So I'm just saying, I don't know what the security protocol is, but that's another thing that's going to come into the frame. I'm telling you right now. The second one is the nature of the partnership mechanics with the NBA itself. I know this would never happen, again, with the money incentives, but something like no more live bets. Literally no more live bets in the NBA. I know that would never happen, but I'm just trying to define an example of something that maybe you could do. I don't know what that thing would be, but I'm just curious. What wiggle room do we have? Can we modify something, I don't know, in there? Maybe we close it after halftime, close it before the fourth quarter. I don't know. Like, I'm not kidding. I'm dead ass. Like, maybe that's something we could I have no idea. I'm just trying to make people think thoughts and not just feel things and yell online. So those are thoughts. The last party I want to touch on quickly is the third parties themselves. So companies like Sports Radar, which I saw noted as well online, they're basically a third-party surveillance company that is on the hook to make sure players, coaches, employees aren't sports betting on their own games, sports betting at all. I don't know. I don't know the nature of that. I didn't look at the website, but that's an example. They are literally a company designed to survey employees to make sure they're not doing weird stuff with their money. So that gets wrapped up into bullet number one, surveillance and auditing. So surveillance, just like I said there, that's an example. The other thing is auditing. So I was a business consultant. We are contracted by a lot of big time companies to prepare their tax return information. If they're paying us to do that kind of service, there is a risk that we mess around with some numbers, pay ourselves more, do some other weird stuff. And so therefore, me or us, we can invest in that company that we audit because of that conflict of interest, right? So when you audit your own players, you have to do it from a third party, right? That's the point. So what did I learn from that experience? Well, number one, it's really expensive. It's really expensive to do that. It's not cheap. And you have the overall auditing, right, of money made in different ways. So that is a thing. So it is one, expensive, but then two, it is challenging. The natural question everybody would ask is, well, where does the buck stop? Are you going to go through my iPhone and look at my WhatsApp messages with my cousin down in Daytona Beach and figure out that I was asking him to put a bunch of money into different bank accounts to bet? I gave him a really sick birthday present that he went ahead and returned for a ton of money and then used that to, I don't know. I don't know how things work. The fundamental question does not change, is where does the buck stop? Sometimes it's just your spousal partner. Sometimes it's your children and whatever, your custodial children and whatever it is. But you understand what I mean. There's just like endless kind of loops and trails you can go to, and that would be the philosophical question of, is Bronny James Jr. legally not allowed to use FanDuel? I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. That's what I mean. This is a weird place. This is why it's weird. Number two is injury consultation. I'm sorry. I got to do it. I guess once a podcast. When Embiid no-showed that game against Denver, went through a full warm-up, had that whatever thing apparently happened in Indiana, still played out that game and won. Came back 2 days later, went through warm-ups. Oh my God, I'm sorry, I just can't do it. How much money was lost? As an example scenario, I am just curious because if you remember that game, Maxey wasn't playing. I believe he was hurt. I can't remember what it was. And I think it was Batum, maybe one of the Morris. I don't know. It was gonna basically be a Joel Embiid Hercules type of performance, at least required in order to not lose by 45 points. Therefore, on the betting spread, I would assume, again, he was listed as active until under 15 minutes to tip off, and then all of a sudden, he is just sitting there. So that begs a question, not only for the sports bettors and the gamblers about the payouts and how much money might have been lost. I'm talking about third-party consultations to approve or flag suspicious injuries. Deadass. This wraps up under the team's tanking and like the team's level incentives and scheming. I don't want these questionable injuries. I think that would be really, really interesting. I'm serious. And not just for the gambling implications, but just for the quality of the sport. I know I had a really strong feelings about that Embiid no-show where it was super clear he was going to get torched. But you cannot have what happened that weekend happen again. And if you want to make up an injury, get him in the office. Get him in the office. Give the people transparency. Because that is a terrible, terrible product, terrible business decision, disrespectful to the fans who paid money to be there, disrespectful to the fans tuning in, top to bottom, yada, disrespectful to Jokic, to the Nuggets as competitors and opponents, like disrespectful top to bottom. Cannot have that happen. So injury, in my opinion, back to the load management stuff as well, I think that has to be very seriously considered. Last but not least, you have stadium security as well. I think of that primarily in the form of revisiting the level of scrutiny and intentionality around fan intervention and engagement with the players. Seriously, just some of those moments about prop bets and live mid-game things could be one of the most detrimental outcomes related to this entire problem and challenge is you have guys thinking about their own stats and other stats for monetary purposes, and you're altering the game. Not good. My preliminary and unprofessional prognosis for Adam Silver in the league would be take a step back and reconsider and revisit the journey that we've been on this season alone. We have literally changed how fouls are being called. The in-season tournament, we have introduced a brand new playing threshold for awards connected to tens of millions of dollars for players to reap. We have seen a season-ending injury from the MVP frontrunner as a result of that. We are seeing more than a handful of guys who would have otherwise been celebrated and documented in the ledger of the league, of the history of the league as all NBA they're now gone. So I say that to say there's just been a lot of change, and I don't mean to vilify all of it, but like that with like a coach was literally saying he was threatened, his family was threatened by a thing that you seem to be diving headfirst into, eyes shut, and trying to propagate it as hard as you can. Seemingly, I watch an unhealthy amount of basketball, and that's how I feel. I also live in a state where it is not legal, so therefore, maybe I just notice it more, and the general or average fan who is in a state where it's legal, maybe they don't, but I'm just telling you, it's everywhere, and you want it to be everywhere and more, and we have threats, and we have players giving their feelings on things, and now we have our first official case of insider trading, essentially. And I'm just saying that we're going down a path that is not only impacting the players as people and the game as a, the game and the product. We're talking about public health. We're talking about the communities you so fiercely advocate for, supporting and being a partner with, and all these things. Like, the messaging is starting to feel a little bit mixed, on top of the fact that we're just very quickly going down a path that feels like it has potential to create mixed impacts for different parties, many of which you claim to very seriously consider and care about, on top of infrastructural changes you've introduced to your own product. And it's really starting to feel like, to me at least, like we're getting over our skis. Like, we're getting over our skis. We're introducing change, and a lot of the time I'm for that. But listen, like, I just don't know how much foresight and level of sufficient investment in time, thought work, projections, consultation with experts has been done about a lot of these things. And particularly with the sports betting stuff, it very much feels like it's coming from a place of money hunger, capitalist, seize the moment, worry about things later on. I'd be very curious to hear what kind of proposed changes in player education or training courses have to go into place. Are we instituting a new third-party governance body to undergo and perform surveillance on players actually betting and using these services, or their loved ones or their friends and families? What is going to happen to Jonte Porter? I'll be honest, guys, I don't have a ton of faith and confidence in Adam Silver and his regime to navigate this extremely complex challenge effectively from a place of proactivity and preemptiveness, as far as investing adequately and looking down the pipeline or the tunnel and thinking critically about what these kinds of decisions could bring 5 years from now, 2 years from now, for all of these different stakeholders and impacted bodies that prop up the league. So that is all, guys. I really hope this is informative. And we will definitely be back. But as always, please let me know your thoughts. I know this is a breaking story. I'm trying to be a little bit better about that. But I clearly love these kinds of philosophical questions, and this is really what gets me excited. So hopefully those are thought-provoking ideas, and we will wait and see to find out where we're going to land. All right? Until next time.